Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How are you guys? One last video to do with X-Wing 2.0 costings for everything in the initial release. This video is going to cover all of the generic upgrades as we can see here on the screen in front of us. Now also, in the first few videos I did of this, I missed a couple of things that were lacking modification slots, and I decided what I'll do is, when we get to the modifications on this list, I'll talk more about that. I obviously mentioned the Fang Fighter being a ship that I particularly love to fly. I had to comment on that. But we also have to talk about the A-Wing and the TIE Advanced prototype, so we'll get to that in a tick. For the time being, let's just have a look through the list and talk about the major outliers. R2 Astromech at 6 points, R3 at 3, 4 at 2, 5 at 5. Nothing too surprising here. Both the Astromechs that relate to recharging shields or repairing hull are the most expensive, as they pretty much should be. Moving on to the cannons. Okay, heavy laser cannon is now 4 points. And I made the comment when this was originally revealed that only being able to shoot inside your bullseye firing arc might result in a massive point reduction, as we can see here it has. And that's very good because now the heavy laser cannon can be taken on a lot more platforms without so many restrictions on list building, namely the Skik fighter, but any other cheaper platform can now take it without any too many restrictions. The assault gunboat is another great example of a ship that's going to like the fact that a heavy laser cannon is now much cheaper. I'm surprised it went down this far. I thought it'd be around the 5-6 point mark, but maybe FFG just when their playtesting discovered that making the restriction only inside the bullseye firing arc was very restrictive for this platform, and I can understand that. If it stayed the same cost, it would basically be unplayable because it would be so inconsistent. Ion cannons, 5 points down from 6 points, makes sense. You don't get 1 point of damage and an ion whenever you hit. It scales with how many times you hit your opponent, so all the ion effects that do that now cost a little bit less than they used to because they're a little bit less powerful. And jamming beam and tractor beam are both 2 points and 3 points respectively. Tractor beam up 1 point from where it used to be. But apart from that, not much changes here. Down to the crew, and two massive outliers here is the Gonk droid is 10 points. I made the comment that I don't think this is going to be much better in second edition. I pretty much stand by that. It was previously a relative 4 points. 10 points is a lot, yeah. I don't honestly see this seeing much meta play. I can honestly see over the course of the first wave, FFG just look at this and end up reducing the cost because I can't see much use for that 10 points. Perceptive Copilot replaces the old Recon spec, which was a relative 6 points, and it's gone all the way up to 10 points, and I don't think that's too crippling for this upgrade. The effect is really, really cool. We do have a few more cards that interact with green tokens, more cards and pilots that deal with jam, so having extra tokens is arguably more powerful. I don't know if it's necessarily worth 10 points, but the fact of the matter is Recon spec in first edition for the relative 6 points was fantastic, made it into a lot of good tier builds. So maybe this is a better reflection of where it always should have been at. Season Navigator, which is replacing Stay on Target, is 5 points, only a fraction more than what Stay on Target was at 4 points. Yeah, seems really good. TAC Officer, which upgrades the quality of your coordinate actions, is only 2 points. That's a really good utility card there. I think the biggest part of the cost of that card is the fact that it takes up a crew slot, but nonetheless, much more competitively costed than like Expert Handling on engine upgrades, which also improve the quality of one of your actions. So not much to talk about there. Oh, no, sorry, before we move on, Informant, 5 points, which is essentially a downgraded version of the Intel Agent, which was a relative 2 points in first edition. So a massive decrease in the power level and increase in the points. Now, I don't think this is a terrible thing. I think Intel Agent was a very good rate at the relative 1 points it used to be. And I think Informant has a lot of strong options in terms of builds. Knowing where your opponent is going to fly is very, very valuable. And also because Informant works during the system phase, it works based on initiative as well, which is good news, bad news kind of thing. It means it's going to be really good on high initiative ships, and it's going to help them potentially bomb better, which could be very interesting. I can see Captain Nim potentially wanting the Informant if he doesn't already want Cad Bane or Genius or that kind of stuff. They put a lot more weight on this kind of effect. It's here on the Informant. It's also in the Force Upgrade sense. Very, very high costed or valuable slots. So that makes sense, putting a bit more weight on that. Our bombs haven't had all that much in the way of points changes. Connonet used to be 8 points, relatively speaking, down to 6 points. Yeah, the effect is a little bit less powerful overall. That makes perfect sense. Proton Bomb was a relative 10 points, down to 5 points. which seems like a pretty decent push for this card, although it doesn't just give face-up damage cards even through shields, and also all the other factors to do with bombs and all that kind of stuff. Everything seems to be a hair cheaper. Even the bomblet generator, which was a relative 6 points, is down to 5 points, but at the same time the bomblet generator needs to use shields in order to recharge. Bombing in general has been made a little bit more accessible, but a little bit less oppressive at the same time, and I think that's a good thing. I think it would be a shame if the archetype just didn't work at all in 2nd edition, but I think FFG are giving it the right pushes in the right places and getting rid of the more annoying stuff as well, and that should be good moving forward. Moving on to the Force upgrades. Heightened Perception, 3 points. Instinctive Aim at 2 points. And Instinctive Aim, actually, that's really good at 2 points, because it's essentially replacing Deadeye, which was also the relative 2 points from 1st edition. And Instinctive Aim, in my eyes, is a bit better because you're using Force tokens. And Force tokens is a resource that replenishes by itself. You don't need to use actions, and that makes Instinctive Aim a little bit more desirable. Plus, I was talking about how Instinctive Aim works on Luke Skywalker. And some people commented, I don't really understand if Luke Skywalker doesn't need to take Force tokens, he'll just be taking target locks anyway. The value in Luke Skywalker is he can replenish Force tokens on the fly, which means it frees up his action bars to do those boosts and those barrel rolls depending on where the configuration is landed. I don't think he's always going to want to take target locks. Plus, being able to take focus tokens on defense is also a powerful thing on top of the Force. Yeah, I think Instinctive Aim is very, very desirable. It gives Luke a lot of flexibility, and it's no surprise that they've tried to flavor match in the way they've designed both Luke and Instinctive Aim. Sense is 6 points, and essentially it's a kind of a worse version of Intel Agent, despite the fact that it costs another relative 4 points more, and it's a Force power, so it's a much more valuable upgrade slot. But again, that ability was always really good, so I'm not going to complain there. Supernatural Reflexes at 12 points. Yeah, I think this is pretty fair enough. It kind of does a push the limit and an advanced sensor all in the one card. Oh man, it's powerful, especially on things like the TIE Advanced prototype. On those generic pilots, unfortunately the generic Inquisitor plus Supernatural Reflexes equals 52 points. You cannot do a 4 of build. That's probably a good thing though. That could have been arguably a bit too powerful. Still a great card on the Inquisitor, on Vader, potentially even on Luke if you don't want to take Instinctive Aim. Yeah, just seems to have a lot of great application. I think this is going to be a very solid card despite the fact that it's expensive. Let's move on to the Gunner card. Now, first up, Agile Gunner is something we don't know about yet. FFG actually included a couple of upgrades in this that we have not seen yet. The fact that it's 10 points leads me to believe it's got to be something pretty good. It's 2 points more than Veteran Turret Gunner. Now, it's not going to be as powerful as any of the named gunners on one of the factions. They're obviously going to be top of the rank in terms of power level. But be curious to see what that is. Hotshot Gunner is essentially a design change from Hotshot Copilot and is a little bit cheaper as a result. Skilled Bombardier at 2 points. Fantastic. This is a great utility card for bombers. We just saw in the other video that the Empire in particular have had the gunner slot added to a lot of their platforms, including both of their bombers. I think it's going to be great on those. It's a little bit awkward on the Fire Spray because you have to take Marauder in order to have a gunner slot. But if you have Marauder, you can't take Andrasta, and then you can't have the extra bombs and the reload. So I don't think this really works on those platforms. It's more for the K-Wing, the TIE Bomber, and the TIE Punisher, I think. Should be a lot of fun. Now, Veteran Tail Gunner and Veteran Turret Gunner are a lot cheaper than I expected. Veteran Tail Gunner is actually the same points as the old Tail Gunner, and I think it's a much better card design. It has a lot more potential. Now, with both of these cards, the flaw is you don't get any value out of them and you've wasted points and the gunner slot, which does hurt. But the ceiling is you're taking multiple shots, and even if that happens like once or twice a game, it feels like that this points investment is well worth it. I'm happy to say with Veteran Tail Gunner in particular, only at 4 points. If it only works once a game on average, that's very good. It doesn't change the quality of your attacks. It's an entire new bonus attacks on top of everything you were doing. So yeah, it looks like this multiple shots is something that they're trying to push. Now, modifications and all that kind of stuff in general have been powered down, so maybe adding more shots into the game is less of a big deal than it once would have been. But nevertheless, aggressively costed stuff. Even the named gunners on the Rebel faction in particular are not that much more expensive than Veteran Turret Gunner. I think there are plenty of scenarios where you'd be happy to invest the extra points. And yeah, just looks really competitively costed. We're going to see a lot of shooting in 2nd edition by the looks of it. Let's move down to the Illicits. Cloaking device has gone up by a point. Contraband cybernetics is up from a relative 2 points to 5 points, which makes me sad. One of the great things about Contraband cybernetics in 1st edition is the fact that it's so cheap and you can chuck it on so many platforms. I personally love to put it on 4 Kirax fighters. That's a lot of fun, especially when it's free. And that gives them a lot of flexibility. Now, because it cost a lot more, I feel like this is more moving towards the realm of going on to more of the named pilots rather than several unnamed pilots. You can still put them on unnamed pilots, but the bigger points investment doesn't feel like I'm getting a lot of value out of it. I feel like I need to justify the extra value by giving more actions to named pilots with powerful abilities. So like your Talonbane Cobras, maybe Cavill, now that he has an illicit slot as well. Any of the Millennium Falcon pilots on Rebel or Scum. Actually on the Rebellion, considering you need to move the mobile firing arc, that could be very, very powerful. Okay, I've convinced myself. 5 points is probably fair enough for this card. Dead Man's Switch has gone from 4 points to 2 points. I don't think that's enough to make it see play, but a points push seems fair enough. I honestly think this card could cost 0 points and it wouldn't rock the meta. It wouldn't be an auto add in all these ships. I still think it's a very dangerous card, even if it were free. Feedback array hasn't changed. Inertial dampeners has gone down a point, but you have to spend shields to use it. The design's changed, so that's fair enough. Rigged Cargo Shoot's gone up to 4 points from a relative 2 points. And Rigged Cargo Shoot is an interesting case because all the action bombs from 1st edition now all drop during the system phase. So Rigged Cargo Shoot is more unique in that it's the only thing you can drop as an action during your activation. It interacts with your initiative. That gives it a bit more power, relatively speaking. And I can understand why it's a bit more expensive. I don't know if 4 points is too much of an increase, but I think just being cautious with that is the right call to make from FFG. Moving on to the missiles, nothing too crazy to report here. Proton rockets has gone up by a point. Ion missiles down from 6 points to 4 points. But again, the effect has been curtailed somewhat in that Ion does not give damage and Ion every single time. Seems fair enough. Concussion missiles down from 8 points to 6 points. Again, design changes across the board, so it's really hard to comment on the power level based on these costings. I will say though that barrage rockets has gone up from 4 points to 6 points, and the design of that hasn't changed that dramatically. It still kind of replaces a primary attack on those 2 red dice primary platforms like your TIE Bomber and your Punisher and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think this is going to be as sought after and as required in 2nd edition. In 1st edition, that felt like a bit of a fix for those platforms, where this is just more options. It offers more flexibility to those platforms, and that's okay. A slight point increase, I think, makes sense in this regard. Now, modifications. Ablative plating, 4 points. Yep, advanced slam, 3 points. Nothing too crazy, but we do have variable point cost on some of these, which I think is a really cool idea. Engine upgrades, for example, scales with the size of your ship. 3 points for a small ship, 6 points for a medium ship, and 9 points for a big base ship. And this is a really good thing because the bigger your ship, the more powerful it is. Basically, every maneuver, including the 1-speed maneuvers off an engine upgrade, becomes more powerful the larger your platform is, because that actually gives you more distance when you use it. Particularly like on things, the Millennium Falcon, Scum or Rebel, they have red boosts, and making sure that they don't just do this in auto add. Now, I still think 9 points is not going to stop people from playing it. Giving a white boost to those platforms is going to be good, but it's not the auto add that it once was on those platforms. And also in the case of small ships, this is fantastic because engine upgrades was always a very expensive thing and it was harder to justify on small platforms. It only costs 3 points on small platforms now. So for example, a Hawk with those red boosts, this has just become much more desirable on those platforms. It feels fair across the board wherever you put it. Great idea from FFG here. I think this is a solid include. Hull upgrade, shield upgrade, and stealth device all scale based on your ship's agility, based on whether it's 0, 1, 2, or 3 points. Hull upgrade, for example, is 2 points on a 0 agility ship, 3 on a 1, 5 on a 2, or 7 on a 3, which I think is a good thing. The best thing to come out of this, I think, is the fact that Teltravura can now take hull upgrade at a reduced cost of 5 points. Because Teltravura wants hull upgrades, but he doesn't want to pay the same as an ace with like 3 hull, but all the agility in the world, like Swinterfell. Sunderfell now has to invest 7 points in this, which is only a slight increase on what it used to be, the relative 6 points from first edition. And in fact, shield upgrade is the same. Best scenario on a ship with the most agility, it costs the same as it did in first edition, but as you put it on ships with lower and lower agility, it just scales down all the way to 3 if you have a ship with 0 agility. Now, if you put it on a ship with 0 agility, you're just going to lose that shield immediately, but you might have payoffs for that. As I said, with Teltravura, there is reasons to sometimes increase these points. In first edition, I thought these were both pretty useless cards, and the fact that they now scale based on their application is a very good thing. Other than that, not too much to talk about with the modifications. Stealth Device does the same thing, but in the case of its most expensive costing on a 3 agility ship, it's now 8 points, which is probably fair enough. It's a really awesome thing to put on Titan Scepters and that kind of stuff. So you got to be a bit more cautious with that. Moving on to systems, which are now apparently called Sensor. Advanced Sensors is now 8 points as opposed to 6 points. And I think this might just be fair enough. I'm particularly looking at the Star Viper, which now has access to this across the board. 8 points feels very fair on that platform, pushing it up a little bit in the points in order to do that curve barrel before you move, especially considering Guri is Initiative 5 now. I think that's probably one of the main reasons they did that. Plus, there are a lot of really powerful applications for this card. I love advanced sensors. I don't think the point increase is going to stop me from playing it, but it will make things a little bit more prohibitive. Collision Detector has a new design, so I can't really comment there. Fire Control Systems down from 4 points to 3 points. Trajectory Simulator up from 2 points to 3 points. Trajectory Simulator is an interesting case now because you have to use it during the system phase, and there are ways to abuse information with that by using informants, but it's nowhere near at the power level it once was. The fact that it absolutely will not work with Genius 100% now is a good thing, but it still gives you bombing flexibility, and it's still a very potent option with Captain Nim. It's a good option with bombs in general. I'll be interested to see how well this works with the Resistance Bomber when we get that in Wave 2. But a slight points increase makes sense. I think that's probably fair enough. Moving on to the talents. Composure! Another card that we know nothing about. Whatever it is, it costs 2 points. Must be a pretty basic ability. However, having said that, it looks like we've got some pretty competitive costings amongst all these talents. Crack Shots, only 1 point, down from 2 points. Feels good, even though the application's a bit more narrow, literally with a bullseye firing arc. Seems really strong. Daredevil, 3 points. Debris Gambit at 2 points is really good, giving any ace platform a red evade or a white evade if they're near a rock. Seems really, really solid. Elusive at 3 points. Expert Handling scales based on how big your ship is, but even at the 6 points on a large base ship, particularly the YT-2400 and the Jump Master are going to get a lot of value out of that. I'm looking mainly at Dash and Dengar with that. The 6 points is not going to be something that you're worried about spending because being able to line up those arcs, roll over rocks, that kind of stuff, yeah. Even Intimidation going up by a point doesn't seem too bad. Duke at 4 points, say the same. Same with Lone Wolf. Marksmanship at 1 point. Yeah, that's really, really competitive. In fact, we have a few different cards that work inside the Bullseye firing arc in Crackshot, Marksmanship, and Predator, and they've all been very aggressively costed. Predator at 2 points makes the most sense because it feels like it's the most vastly applicable out of all those cards. But Marksmanship changes a hit to a crit, and on some platforms that really want critical damage, like Bosk, yeah, that seems very competitive. I think Bosk with Marksmanship is going to be pretty solid. Outmaneuver at 6 points, that hasn't changed. Squad Leader hasn't changed either. Swarm Tactics down from 4 points to 3 points. And Trick Shot up from 0 point to 1 point. Not much to talk about there. Now onto the Torpedoes, and there isn't a whole lot to say here in terms of power level because a lot of these designs have changed. I will say the Proton Torpedoes, staying at around about the same cost. It was previously a relative 8 points, now 9 points. Feels good considering you can shoot it multiple times. I feel like that's going to be a pretty strong option, especially on Luke. Advanced Proton Torpedoes has an entirely new design, so I won't talk about that. And Ion Torpedoes has been curtailed somewhat because you have to hit with multiple results in order to do ion damage. So that all seems fair enough. Not much to talk about there. Dorsal Turret down from 6 points to 4 points. Great to see. Considering we don't have any TLT or any other really strong turret options, I think that's fair enough. And considering Ion Cannon Turret now doesn't have as much wide application as it once did, it now needs to hit multiple times in order to do ion damage. It feels a little bit less like a great control option. I still think it's potent, and the fact that it's 6 points coming down all the way from 10 points is good. but dorsal turret in particular, I like that it's only 4 points. Now, turrets in general have been powered down because you have to move the mobile firing arc manually. Having said that, there are still things you can combo with it, like veteran turret gunner and that kind of thing. So I look at these and think this is probably fair enough. I think this point reduction is enough to make them continue to see play, but they're not going to be problematic, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. At the bottom of the page, we have a chart talking about the variable costings on the cards we already talked about. So that is it, guys. That is all the costings for X-Wing 2nd Edition, at least for the first batch of stuff we're getting in Wave 1. All looks good here. No massive surprises out of everything we have here. The most expensive things were pretty much what I expect them to be. Things that give ships more action economy across the board seems to be having the most heavy weighting in terms of what we have here. I gotta say, everything that has action economy built into it in terms of generic effects has had what I expected to be the most costing, but I actually assumed moving into this that we would have a strict upgrading costing and all these generic upgrades across the board. My attitude with first edition was we just had it too good with some of these costings. And some of them have gone up, but most of them have, if anything, gone down a smidge. And that surprised me. I really thought FFG would put a bit more of a weighting on investing points in the ships rather than the upgrades. Although I'm not going to complain. X-Wing is about list building, and making sure everything is accessible and there's lots of options is a good thing for the game. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. In the section below, please post your initial X-Wing 2.0 lists and we'll talk about them in a future video. Like and subscribe, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and I'll catch you guys later.